He built the ultimate weapon, yet it haunted him until his dying day. How does one reconcile the brilliance of scientific discovery with the devastating power it unleashes? We're diving into the tragic personal torment of J. Robert Oppenheimer and the enduring ethical questions his creation left in its wake. The year is 1942. The world is locked in the deadliest conflict in human history. Nazi Germany controls most of Europe. Japan dominates the Pacific, and in laboratories across the occupied territories, German physicists are racing to unlock the atom's destructive potential. The fear-gripping Allied leaders isn't just about losing battles, it's about losing the war before it truly begins, incinerated by a weapon no one has ever seen. In the United States, physicists understand what's at stake. Einstein has already warned President Roosevelt that a single bomb could destroy an entire harbor. The race is on. But who could possibly lead such an unprecedented scientific effort? Who has the brilliance, the charisma, and the nerve to turn theoretical physics into humanity's most powerful weapon? The government's answer surprises almost everyone. J. Robert Oppenheimer is a theoretical physicist, not an experimentalist. He's never won a Nobel Prize. He's known for his wide-ranging intellect, his love of Sanskrit poetry, his chain-smoking, and his past flirtations with communist organizations in Berkeley. But General Leslie Groves sees something others miss. Oppenheimer has a gift for understanding complex problems across disciplines. He can speak the language of experimentalists, engineers, and military planners. He can translate. He can lead. So how did this shy, theoretical physicist become the face of humanity's most terrifying invention? By late 1943, Oppenheimer is directing a secret city rising from the New Mexico desert. Los Alamos. The name means nothing to the outside world behind barbed wire and security checkpoints. More than 6,000 people work on components they're often not allowed to discuss with each other. Compartmentalization is the rule. Scientists sleep in crude barracks. Their children attend makeshift schools. Mail is censored. No one can say where they live. But inside the tech area, the work is extraordinary. Oppenheimer has assembled the greatest concentration of physics talent ever gathered in one place. Henri Fermi, Niels Bohr, Richard Feynman, Hans Bethe, Edward Teller. These men are calculating the precise conditions needed to split plutonium atoms at such speed that the energy release becomes catastrophic. They call it fast fission. The challenge is finding a way to compress a subcritical sphere of plutonium into a supercritical mass before it blows itself apart. The solution they arrive at sounds almost elegant. Surround the plutonium core with conventional explosives arranged in a perfect sphere. Detonate all the explosives simultaneously. The inward shockwave compresses the core. The atoms split. The chain reaction begins. It happens faster than thought, faster than a lightning strike. In less than a millionth of a second, the energy equivalent of 20,000 tons of TNT erupts from a sphere the size of a grapefruit. But there's an uncertainty no equation can resolve. Will it work? And if it works, what exactly happens next? By the summer of 1945, Germany has surrendered. The original justification for the bomb, stopping Hitler, no longer applies, yet the project accelerates. Japan fights on. The Pentagon estimates that invading the Japanese home islands could cost 1 million Allied casualties. The bomb offers a different path, but it's never been tested at full scale. No one truly knows if the implosion design will function. No one knows if the atmosphere itself might ignite. Oppenheimer and his team choose a desolate stretch of desert in southern New Mexico for the test. They name it Trinity. The name comes from a John Donne poem Oppenheimer loves, "Batter my heart, three-personed God." The tower rises 100 feet above the sand. At its top sits the device, a sphere of explosives and plutonium, nicknamed the Gadget. It weighs nearly 5 tons. On the morning of July 16, 1945, scientists gather in bunkers 5 miles from Ground Zero. It's still dark. Rain has delayed the test. Oppenheimer barely sleeps. At 5:29 a.m., the countdown reaches 0. The light arrives first. Brighter than 1,000 suns, witnesses will later say. It turns night into something beyond day, a searing, white-purple brilliance that sears shadows into the sand. Then the sound. A roaring crack that splits the desert silence. Then the heat. Observers feel it on their faces from miles away. A wave of warmth that shouldn't be possible at this distance. And then the cloud, the mushroom cloud, rising 8 miles into the sky, boiling with colors no one has words for. Oppenheimer's immediate reaction is relief. It works. But in that same moment, a line from the Bhagavad Gita surfaces in his mind. A line he'll repeat for the rest of his life. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." In a moment, we'll step into the New Mexico desert at dawn and watch the sky turn into something no human had ever seen before. But first, we need to understand something crucial. Trinity wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. 3 weeks after Trinity, the war in the Pacific continues. American bombers have already burned dozens of Japanese cities with conventional incendiary raids: Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe. Hundreds of thousands are dead. But Japan's military leadership shows no sign of surrender. The Potsdam Declaration, demanding unconditional surrender, has been rejected. The invasion of Kyushu is scheduled for November. President Truman faces a choice: continue the blockade and bombing campaign, wait for Soviet entry into the war, or use the new weapon. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber called Enola Gay lifts off from Tinian Island carrying a uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy. The target is Hiroshima, a city of 350,000 people, home to the Second Army headquarters and a major military port. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb detonates 1,800 feet above the city. The fireball reaches 18 million degrees Fahrenheit. Everything within a mile of the hypocenter simply ceases to exist. Stone buildings vaporize. Steel melts. Human beings near Ground Zero are reduced to shadows, burned into concrete. The shockwave flattens 4 square miles of the city. 70,000 people die instantly. By the end of the year, radiation and injuries will bring the total to 140,000. 3 days later, a second bomb falls on Nagasaki. 40,000 dead in the initial blast. Another 40,000 by year's end. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. The war is over. When did a shy theoretical physicist become the face of humanity's most terrifying invention? When Oppenheimer hears the news from Hiroshima, his first reaction is elation. It worked. The bomb ended the war. Los Alamos erupts in celebration. Scientists who spent years on calculations and metallurgy and implosion lenses finally see their work vindicated. But the celebrations don't last long for Oppenheimer. As reports filter back from Japan, as the casualty numbers climb, as descriptions of the destruction reach American newspapers, something shifts inside him. This wasn't just a new weapon. It was the start of a new kind of fear, one you are still living with right now. In October 1945, Oppenheimer resigns from Los Alamos. He returns to his teaching position at Caltech, then accepts the directorship of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. But he doesn't retreat from public life. Instead, he becomes one of the most prominent voices warning about nuclear danger. He testifies before Congress. He advises the State Department. He appears on the covers of magazines, and he repeats his message: the bomb cannot be uninvented, but it can be controlled. Oppenheimer supports the Acheson-Lilienthal Plan, a proposal to place all atomic energy research and production under international control, supervised by the United Nations. The plan is ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. It requires nations to surrender their nuclear sovereignty. The Soviet Union, building its own bomb in secret, rejects it. The plan dies, but Oppenheimer keeps trying. He argues against the development of the hydrogen bomb, a weapon hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan. He writes that such a weapon has no military purpose, only genocidal potential. He calls it a weapon of mass murder. His opposition infuriates military planners and politicians who see the H-bomb as necessary to maintain American superiority. Edward Teller, his former colleague at Los Alamos, pushes for the hydrogen bomb. The scientific community fractures. In 1952, the United States detonates the first thermonuclear device. It vaporizes an entire island in the Pacific. Its yield is 10 megatons, 500 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. The Soviets follow with their own test 9 months later. The arms race that Oppenheimer feared is now fully underway. So when the war ended, why didn't Oppenheimer simply celebrate victory and move on like so many others? The answer lies partly in his personality, partly in his reading of history, and partly in what he witnessed at Trinity. Oppenheimer understood that he'd helped create a discontinuity in human affairs before Trinity. Nations could recover from wars, cities could be rebuilt, populations could grow again. After Trinity, that calculus changed. A single bomb could kill 1 million people. A dozen bombs could end a civilization. 100 bombs could arguably end the human species. This realization weighs on him. He speaks about it in public lectures. He describes scientists as having known sin. He means they've created something with moral weight that can't be undone. The metaphor comes from his love of religious and philosophical texts. The Bhagavad Gita, the text he quotes at Trinity, is a Hindu scripture about a warrior prince named Arjuna who hesitates before a great battle. The god Krishna tells him he must fulfill his duty. Oppenheimer identifies with Arjuna. He built the bomb because his country needed it. But unlike Arjuna, he can't find peace with that duty. What happens when a man who built the bomb starts arguing that no one should truly own it? The political climate shifts. By the early 1950s, the United States is gripped by anti-communist paranoia. Senator Joseph McCarthy holds hearings accusing government officials of Soviet sympathies. The FBI investigates thousands of Americans for suspected disloyalty, and Oppenheimer, with his past associations with communist organizations, his opposition to the H-bomb, and his continued advocacy for arms control, becomes a target. In December 1953, the Atomic Energy Commission suspends Oppenheimer's security clearance. The formal accusation cites his pre-war connections to communists, including his wife Kitty, his brother Frank, and his former girlfriend Jean Tatlock. But everyone understands the real issue. Oppenheimer's opposition to the hydrogen bomb has made him a liability. If he's silenced, his credibility as a critic disappears. The hearing begins in April 1954. It lasts 3 weeks. 40 witnesses testify. The proceedings are supposed to be confidential, but transcripts leak to the press almost daily. Oppenheimer is forced to revisit every friendship, every meeting, every conversation from the 1930s. His lawyers argue that he was never disloyal, that he directed Los Alamos successfully, that he served his country with distinction, but the outcome is predetermined. Edward Teller testifies against him. Teller doesn't call Oppenheimer a traitor. He says something more damaging. He suggests that in a matter of national security, he would feel more comfortable if the country's interests were in other hands. The phrase is devastating. It implies that Oppenheimer's judgment can't be trusted. On May 27, 1954, the Gray Board votes 4-1 to revoke Oppenheimer's security clearance. The decision doesn't question his loyalty to the United States. It claims he demonstrated a lack of candor in some of his testimony, but the practical effect is total. Oppenheimer loses access to classified information. He can no longer advise the government. Many of his colleagues distance themselves. The man who led the Manhattan Project is now a pariah. If you're finding this deep dive into history valuable, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It's how we continue making source-grounded documentaries about science, ethics, and the decisions that shaped our world. In the next few minutes, we'll step inside the hearing room where Oppenheimer watched his life's work turned against him, and we'll trace the nuclear shadow that grew longer even as he lost his voice. The hearing destroys Oppenheimer personally and professionally. He remains director of the Institute for Advanced Study, but his influence on policy evaporates. He retreats into physics, literature, and sailing. He smokes too much. He drinks too much. Friends describe him as diminished, a man carrying a burden he can never set down. But while Oppenheimer is losing his security clearance, the bombs he helped create are multiplying in hidden silos across the globe. By 1955, both the United States and the Soviet Union possess hydrogen bombs. The doctrine of mutual assured destruction takes shape. If either side launches a nuclear attack, the other will retaliate, ensuring both nations are destroyed. MAD, as it's called, becomes the grim logic holding the world back from annihilation, its deterrence through guaranteed catastrophe. The arsenals grow at a terrifying pace. By the early 1960s, the United States has more than 20,000 nuclear warheads. The Soviet Union has a similar number. Britain, France, and China develop their own weapons. Every major city becomes a potential target. School children practice duck and cover drills. Families build fallout shelters in their backyards. The fear is real and pervasive. In October 1962, the world comes within hours of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis begins when American reconnaissance planes discover Soviet missiles being installed in Cuba. 90 miles from Florida, President Kennedy orders a naval blockade. Soviet ships carrying more missiles steam toward the quarantine line. For 13 days, the two superpowers teeter on the edge. At one point, a Soviet submarine nearly fires a nuclear-tipped torpedo at American destroyers. The order to fire requires agreement from 3 officers. 2 agree. 1, Vasily Arkhipov, refuses. His decision likely saves millions of lives. The crisis ends when Soviet Premier Khrushchev agrees to remove the missiles in exchange for an American promise not to invade Cuba and a secret agreement to remove American missiles from Turkey. But the world has glimpsed the abyss. The arms race continues. Did silencing Oppenheimer make the world safer or more dangerous? The historical record suggests his warnings were prescient. Every fear he expressed about the arms race came true. The proliferation he predicted happened. The near-miss incidents he worried about occurred multiple times. In 1983, a Soviet early warning system malfunctioned and indicated that American missiles were incoming. The officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, correctly judged it was a false alarm. If he'd followed protocol and reported an attack, Soviet leadership might have launched a retaliatory strike. Again, one person's judgment prevented catastrophe. By the 1960s, Oppenheimer's reputation begins a slow rehabilitation. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy presents him with the Enrico Fermi Award, the Atomic Energy Commission's highest honor. It's a tacit acknowledgement that the 1954 hearing was unjust. Lyndon Johnson, who becomes president after Kennedy's assassination, personally hands Oppenheimer the award at a White House ceremony. Oppenheimer accepts it without bitterness. He thanks his colleagues. He doesn't revisit the hearing. But the award doesn't erase the damage. Oppenheimer is diagnosed with throat cancer in 1965. He's a lifelong smoker, 2 packs a day for decades. The cancer is aggressive. He undergoes radiation therapy. The irony isn't lost on anyone. The man who unleashed atomic energy on the world is now dying from radiation designed to save him. He weakens rapidly. On February 18, 1967, J. Robert Oppenheimer dies at his home in Princeton. He's 62 years old. His legacy remains contested. To some, he's a hero who ended World War II and saved countless lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Japan. To others, he's a tragic figure who unleashed a power humanity wasn't ready for and spent the rest of his life trying to contain it. To still others, he's a cautionary tale about the limits of scientific responsibility, a man who helped build a bomb and then discovered he had no control over how it was used. If his regret couldn't stop the arms race, what can it still teach us? Today, 9 nations possess nuclear weapons: the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. The total global arsenal is approximately 12,500 warheads, down from a peak of 70,000 during the Cold War. That sounds like progress until you realize that 12,500 warheads is still enough to destroy civilization many times over. The threat hasn't disappeared, it's evolved. Russia and the United States maintain hundreds of weapons on high alert, ready to launch within minutes. The doctrine of launch on warning, designed to prevent a disarming first strike, means that a sensor malfunction or a miscommunication could trigger a nuclear exchange before leaders have time to fully assess the situation. Regional conflicts carry nuclear risk. India and Pakistan have fought multiple wars and engaged in border skirmishes. Both nations have nuclear arsenals and relatively short warning times. A conventional conflict could escalate rapidly. North Korea's nuclear program remains a source of tension. Iran's nuclear ambitions raise questions about proliferation in the Middle East. Every time you hear the word nuclear in today's headlines, you're hearing an echo of his regret and a question about what we do with our own inventions. But the nuclear shadow extends beyond weapons. Oppenheimer's story resonates today because we face parallel dilemmas with new technologies, artificial intelligence, gene editing, synthetic biology. Each represents a powerful capability with transformative potential and catastrophic risk. Each raises questions about governance, control, and unintended consequences. Each requires us to think carefully about what we're building and why. Consider AI. Machine learning systems now outperform humans in narrow tasks: image recognition, language translation, game playing. The frontier is artificial general intelligence, systems that match or exceed human cognitive abilities across all domains. Some researchers predict AGI could arrive within decades. Others think it's further off or impossible. But the question remains, if we succeed in building machines smarter than ourselves, how do we ensure they serve human values? How do we maintain control? How do we prevent misuse? The parallels to Oppenheimer's dilemma are striking. Scientists and engineers building AI systems often express excitement about the technology's potential to solve problems, cure diseases, optimize logistics, accelerate research. But they also voice concerns. What if these systems are weaponized? What if they're used for surveillance and control? What if we create something we don't fully understand and can't fully predict? Gene editing through CRISPR offers similar promise and peril. The ability to rewrite DNA could eliminate genetic diseases, increase crop yields, and slow aging, but it also raises the possibility of designer babies, engineered inequality, and bioweapons. In 2018, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui announced he'd edited the genes of human embryos to make them resistant to HIV. The babies were born. The scientific community reacted with alarm. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison in China. But the capability exists. The knowledge is spreading. Oppenheimer didn't stop the atomic bomb. Can we stop or control technologies that may be equally transformative? The answer isn't simple. Complete prohibition rarely works for scientific knowledge. Once a discovery is made, it spreads. What matters is governance, international agreements, verification mechanisms, ethical frameworks, public debate about what we value and what we're willing to risk. Oppenheimer advocated for these things after World War II. He was largely unsuccessful in his time, but his arguments laid groundwork for later arms control efforts. The Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963 prohibited nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968 committed nuclear states to disarmament and non-nuclear states to forego weapons. These treaties didn't eliminate nuclear weapons, but they slowed proliferation and reduced some risks. They proved that international cooperation is possible, even on the most dangerous technologies. The lesson from Oppenheimer's life isn't that scientists shouldn't pursue knowledge. It's that knowledge comes with responsibility. It's that the people who build powerful technologies have an obligation to think through the consequences and advocate for wise use. It's that regret after the fact, while human and understandable, is no substitute for foresight. Oppenheimer made choices under extreme pressure in extraordinary circumstances. He led a project that may have shortened World War II and saved lives, or may have demonstrated a weapon against a nation already on the brink of surrender. Historians still debate the necessity of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but what's not debatable is that he helped create a weapon that changed history, and he spent the rest of his life grappling with that change. His famous quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," is often misunderstood. It's taken as a statement of regret or guilt, but in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's words to Arjuna are about duty and the reality of destruction that already exists. Oppenheimer wasn't just expressing remorse. He was recognizing that he'd become an instrument of a larger historical force. That recognition didn't bring him peace, but it gave him clarity about what came next. He couldn't undo what he'd done. He could only try to prevent worse. In his later years, Oppenheimer spoke less about the bomb and more about science's role in culture. He gave lectures on the relationship between science and human values. He emphasized that scientists are citizens with responsibilities beyond their laboratories. He argued that the pursuit of knowledge must be tempered by wisdom about its application. These aren't just abstractions. They're questions every generation must answer. What kind of world do we want to live in? What risks are we willing to accept for progress? Who decides how powerful technologies are used? These questions mattered in 1945. They matter now. The nuclear shadow Oppenheimer helped cast still falls across the world. But it's not just a shadow of fear. It's also a shadow of memory and warning. It reminds us that human ingenuity can create wonders and horrors. That scientific achievement doesn't guarantee moral wisdom. That the people who build the future have a voice, but not ultimate control over what's built. Oppenheimer's regret wasn't just about the bombs. It was about the gap between intention and consequence. He built a weapon to stop Hitler. It was used on Japan after Germany surrendered. He hoped the bomb's horror would prevent future wars. Instead, it launched an arms race that threatened humanity for decades and continues today. He believed international control was possible. It proved politically unattainable. But his regret also reflects something deeper. The recognition that some acts can't be undone. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Some knowledge, once discovered, can't be forgotten. That's the burden of living in a scientific age. We keep learning, we keep building, and we have to live with what we create. So what kind of responsibility do we owe the future when we invent something the world can never unsee? Oppenheimer never fully answered that question for himself, but he showed us why it matters. His life is a reminder that brilliance without wisdom can lead to catastrophe, that good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes, that the power to destroy comes more easily than the wisdom to restrain it. And that regret, however genuine, is a poor substitute for foresight. We live in the world Oppenheimer helped create, a world where human extinction is technically possible, where the weapons capable of ending civilization are still deployed, still maintained, still part of military doctrine, but also a world where we've survived longer than many expected, where treaties have limited some risks, where the taboo against nuclear use has held for nearly 80 years since Nagasaki. That survival isn't inevitable. It requires constant vigilance, diplomacy, and the courage to confront uncomfortable questions about power, ethics, and risk. It requires us to learn from history, including the tragic arc of Oppenheimer's life. He built the bomb. He tried to control it. He failed in many of his goals, but his effort, his warnings, and his regret remain part of our inheritance. The nuclear age isn't over. The ethical dilemmas of powerful technologies aren't resolved, and the question Oppenheimer embodied still echoes every time we stand at the threshold of a new discovery. What will we do with this power? Who will benefit? Who will be harmed? And what world will we leave behind? These aren't questions for scientists alone. They're questions for all of us, because the shadow Oppenheimer cast doesn't just fall on physicists or policymakers. It falls on every person living in a world shaped by the technologies we choose to build and deploy. If this video changed how you think about Oppenheimer, nuclear weapons, or the responsibility that comes with innovation, share it with someone who needs to see it and leave a comment. What topic should we explore next? The hydrogen bomb debates of the 1950s, the Cuban Missile Crisis in depth, or a modern parallel like the race to develop artificial general intelligence? Your input shapes what we research next. The story of J. Robert Oppenheimer is a story about genius and regret, ambition and consequence, power and responsibility. It's a story that began in the New Mexico desert on a summer morning in 1945.